Well, if you've been listening to our podcast, you know we did a two-part series on body image, and it's always good to bring in some folks to organize that and courageously. I love when people bring their story onto these podcasts to put their own experiences in to the conversation, so that it can just add to the hope if you're struggling with body image and what that looks like. And so excited to unpack and bring some life-changing stories around body image as we talk about that on today's podcast. Welcome to Hope and Recovery, a Fellowship Celebrate Recovery podcast that shares hope and healing for our mental, spiritual, emotional, and relational journey through life-changing stories, recovery topics, all centered around the Beatitudes of Matthew chapter 5 and the Celebrate Recovery principles, where Jesus helps us to face our hurts, our hang-ups, those lies that we believe about ourselves, God, and others, and even our circumstances, and ultimately tackle those defenses and protections, or what we call habits, that cause havoc on our relationships with God and others in their road to recovery. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. I struggle with drugs and alcohol and perfectionism. My name is Rodney. I'm the pastor and ministry leader here at Fellowship Bible Church, Celebrate Recovery in Rogers. And it's always good to be here with you. And thank you so much for your efforts to get the word out, to give us a 5-star rating if you can, and a review. And if you don't like what you're hearing, if you have suggestions, we always love to hear from you. Email me. You can find my email on our website. But hey, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm excited about today's topic. On a previous couple podcasts, I was talking about body image, which seems to be growing in our society. And I wanted to bring in some friends that have struggled in this area and found recovery, and they're still on the journey, but just to give you some hope. So I interviewed them, and I want to bring you into that conversation as we continue the discussion around body image. Welcome, Julia and Josh. Glad to have you guys.
Thanks for letting us be here, Rodney.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah. Well, why don't you introduce yourselves, and then we'll jump into a conversation.
Okay. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ, and I celebrate recovery over a sexual addiction, and I still struggle with lust, body image issues, and codependency, and my name is Julia.
Hey, Julia.
Julia. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. I struggle with lust, codependency, anxiety, and insecurity. My name's Josh.
Hey, Josh. Thank you guys so much for coming on here. So, the prior podcast, we kind of got into some of those characteristics, but what are some of the things that jump out when we say, I struggle with body image? What's some initial things that just jump out that come to the front of your mind in that?
I think the first piece of that is I feel like something's wrong with me when I look in the mirror, or when I don't know, when I go for a walk, when I go for a run, or there's some sense of comparison in that. And usually, though, not so much comparing myself to anything specific, but I think to a lot of images that I have in my mind of what I'm supposed to be, without really drawing or being very specific about what that is. At least that's in my mind. And so lots of feelings of shame, lots of feelings of self-hatred, lots of feelings of I'm not good enough, but I'm also not comparing myself necessarily to what I think good enough is supposed to be. That's at least been my experience. What would you add?
Yeah, I think similarly, for me, it's always felt like, there's some standard that everyone else is meeting or doing, and I am not hitting that standard. And so, which is so funny because I feel like body image issues, so many people struggle with. So everyone feels like they're not meeting this invisible standard. And so, yeah, I think for me, that's kind of what comes to my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. On the prior podcast, we were talking about just a preoccupation with my appearance, or negative self-talk, a distorted perception. There's some other ones that we covered, but what are some of the things as you're looking at the characteristics that jump out at you, and as much as you feel comfortable as we think about the hurts, hangups, and habits, as we think about some of those core beliefs, that negative self-talk, what are some of those messages that you hear in the struggle with body image that kind of get us stuck?
Yeah, I think so I know my stepdaddy was really helpful in unpacking this. When I was a kid, I was overweight, and I remember being made fun of for that. And then I had what a lot of kids have, and I was in like 5th grade, and I hit a growth spurt, and then I got really skinny, and I was also made fun of for that. And I just remember being 12 or 13 years old and looking in the mirror and asking my dad, and I was like, Dad, am I going to look completely different when I'm an adult? And the question, the feeling beneath that question was just this idea of there's something wrong with me. And I really hope that something changes about me fundamentally, that when I look in the mirror, I'll finally be happy with what I see. And so far, I've never really quite reached that, like being actually happy with what I see. And so I like what Julia said about this idea of comparison that kind of comes with this, because I feel like right along with that, there's this idea of approval, of wanting to be approved, that's really attached to this. And I'm not necessarily approving of my own body when I see it in the mirror. And it's taken a lot of forms since I was a kid, since I was a teenager. Now that I'm an adult, it's gone through a lot of things, and it's never led to this sense of being happy with my body. And I think that's been generally the things when you talk about kind of the preoccupation. The other thing is, are other people looking at my body the same way I am, and really not wanting to draw attention to it, because it always leads to those kinds of feelings of insecurity that I have.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think for me, kind of a lot of the core beliefs are that if I'm not meeting some sort of standard that this world has or this culture has around me, then I'm going to be rejected in some way, or I'm not going to be accepted. And I think what's scary for me, like, I don't think that I grew up with, since I was really little, I don't remember just being made fun of a lot, or had this, or I'd never fit the standard. This kind of like just hit me like in middle school, where all of a sudden I was like, wait, is there some sort of standard that I'm not meeting? And it was like, I think there's a whole other level of like embarrassment too that comes along, where it's like there's something fundamentally flawed about me. And body image is so insidious in that it so often we can't change these things about our body. We're not supposed to. This is how we're made and how God has made us. But in some ways, we feel like we can tweak certain things, or work out here, or do this, or change this, or get surgery. And so it is this false sense of, I do have control over this and I can change it, so why wouldn't I? But then it's also fleeting, because we can't change things, or even if we can with surgery, something like that, we shouldn't. Like, we shouldn't have to do that to be loved and accepted. And it's not about our body. Like, our bodies give us so much more. Like, we can accomplish things and have loved ones and experience touch that's loving. And like, we get so caught up in image and like this quote unquote beauty that we see, whereas our bodies are designed to do so much more for us apart from that too, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It feels like there's like universal truths about everyone's bodies and what they're for and how they're designed. And there's also individual things about every individual's body, whether that's your DNA, your chemical makeup, the things you're interested in doing, the things that you did growing up and that kind of thing, how that shaped your body. And there's kind of this failure to accept both universal, big, large, cosmic truths about the human body. And then really, like, I know I have a hard time just accepting truths about my own body and my own. The Olympics just ended. One of the craziest things about the Olympics is seeing different types of human bodies that are peak form for whatever their sport is. And then somehow we get this idea that there is a peak form, and I'm supposed to be that one. And you look at an Olympic basketball player, and you look at an Olympic, I don't know, whether the sharpshooters or break dancers, which are, and those are different kinds of bodies, but they were peak for something.
And they're all beautiful in their own way because they accomplished something. Yeah, I think that's so true too. And it speaks to like oh no, what was I going to say? I knew this was going to happen to me.
Well, and you talking about the Olympics. I mean, I'm thinking about, who's the player from Denver?
Nikola Jokic.
Yeah, Jokic. So his stature, his look, and then you take someone like LeBron James, right? Completely different builds, but incredibly gifted and talented what they do. But you could look at one and go, oh, well, he's not really not fit by our standards, right? And it's just interesting. We were talking about this off air. Even by cultures, and I can't even remember where is he from?
Serbia.
Culturally, what is beautiful there looks completely different here, and even defining that's beautiful. What lens are you looking through?
And I think so much of that's passive. Both of us kind of talked about, middle school starting to suddenly feel these things that you can't quite articulate of what exactly you're feeling. And then you're comparing your body to LeBron James, who one is physically really gifted, but also has dedicated millions and millions of dollars to his own body. And you compare yourself to Olympic. There are millions of middle school kids that have watched the Olympics this year and suddenly made assumptions about their own bodies based on what they're seeing the world's best athletes performing in very specific sports, how it's supposed to be designed. Yeah.
Well, and what I think is so beautiful too is that every person's body does tell a story about who they are, and we have all developed our bodies somehow, you know what I mean? Like whether it's, we were really athletic growing up, or maybe we didn't, or even like if we're having a CR story, maybe we experienced a lot of abuse and we have scars or different things like it's actually revealing something beautiful about us. Like we understand someone so much more and things they've gone through. There's like a level of intimacy there of being like, oh, now I know so much. Like I see something physical on you that is an indication of something hard that you went through, or that the Lord has redeemed and now it's beautiful. And like, we don't really think of that. We just think of, oh, okay, this is my body and this is flawed here, or this is good here. And it's all telling a beautiful story that I just think is cool to think about that too.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's some of the costs for you guys as you think about your stories? And you guys are doing great kind of bringing us into peek into your life. What are some of the costs, some of those things we talked about prior, fluctuating weight, social withdrawal, or in social settings, we might change the way we interact with food, or being obsessed with kind of how we dress and how we look to. What are some of those things that, real practical speaking, that were factors for you in your story that played a part in how you view the world and how you move forward with that?
Oh man, my first thing is I started learning from high school football coaches in East Arkansas what I was supposed to do to make my body better. And we have learned so much even in the decade plus since then about the human body. And so there's just this these core beliefs that get formed really early about how I'm supposed to go work out and what the numbers, how much I'm supposed to be lifting, what times I'm supposed to be making running. And it really, on one hand, doesn't give very realistic expectations for even the passage of time or what it's like to grow and work and have a career and have a family and have priorities. And I think the first thing I think of is priority lists change if we have unrealistic views of our body. The things move up the list that probably don't need to be prioritized as high, whether that's, perfect diet or perfect exercise regimen or those kinds of things. And other things get pushed down if we're prioritizing that too high. Or there's the emotional cost of just looking at myself and the self-hatred, and it leads into, I know for me, those escapist behaviors where I'm just trying to pull away and find, if I don't like my body, someone that does, or someone that will affirm me and those kinds of things, or find some way to earn people's affection. And I think that's one of the core things I know I run into is just this kind of social cost of, am I good enough for other people? And how, if I'm not going to earn it through my body, how can I earn that through other ways? So performance or avoidance, whatever those may be, those insecurities always find some kind of payout, and or our body or our souls or our hearts are asking questions, and then we're asking those questions in the wrong places if we're going to, is my body good enough to answer this for me?
That's good. Go, Julia?
Oh, no, yeah. I mean, I was just going to say, I think for me, like one of the first memories I have of kind of, I think, birthed out this struggle for body image issues for me was in middle school, I think, or maybe it was high school actually. Just I had a bunch of girlfriends, and I think it was one of those dances coming up. I don't know if it was prom or something. And I really liked this dress that my friend wore the year before. And I was like, hey, can I come try on your dress? I really liked it. And she's like, sure. Well, it didn't fit. And it was two of my friends that were there. And I just remember this moment being like, oh my gosh, like I hadn't previously struggled with like comparison at all. And then all of a sudden, like in this moment, it was like completely birthed out of it. And it was like, oh, am I not meeting some standard that I didn't even realize was there? Like, am I broken in some way? And I don't think that I really had anyone to like go to or process that with. And so I went to the culture, and it's like how damaging that was. And then all of a sudden it was like, this huge thing was birthed out where it was like, okay, I need to hit that standard to be accepted, which was not the right, response, but makes total sense that I would have, and so it's just heartbreaking how many other women and young men who are still just having those moments every day of not realizing. I just think about how innocent and young our kids are. Like I truly didn't. I remember saying like, I don't really know what makes someone beautiful. Like that was like a thing. And then all of a sudden having this happen and this whole world was thrown. I think it's just like the beautiful innocence of being like, everyone's beautiful. I don't really think about it is like really sweet. And
wow. Well, so I think that that's interesting because that's a great question as we're kind of thinking about, I'm struggling with body image, is at what moment, it's a great question to ask, when did you first learn that you weren't enough, that your body was not enough? And that's an event, right? That trying on a dress, very innocent situation, it could be perceived from the outside, oh, what's the big deal? But to you, that was a big deal, and it impacted you, kind of sent you on this trajectory of maybe I'm not enough. Maybe what I look like, I'm too heavy, not too skinny, whatever is not enough. And then it can take one event like that can spin us out. Yeah.
It makes me think of any time like you've gone shopping and you thought you were one size and you found out you were a different size.
Devastating.
Just one way or the other. Or the other mental image is like shopping as a kid and your mom like makes sure that like the pants fit and you're like, I never want to come to one of these places again. It's just this feeling of shame that comes in when you are doing something as essential as buying clothes. And that's back to school season. I was talking to a high school guy yesterday. He's wearing a hat, took his hat off. He'd just gotten a haircut and he was really embarrassed by his hair. It was fine. The haircut was fine, but he was just suddenly very self-conscious, even very self-deprecating, and the humor coming with that. But it's something that just hits us in all aspects of life. Yeah. And I think we also just kind of learn how to roll with the punches of it and don't necessarily, or at least I've learned to roll with the punches of it and move past that feeling because it's a terribly uncomfortable thing to sit with. It's really painful. There's not a lot of conversations in the high school guys' locker room about how we're feeling about our own bodies.
Yes.
But that is a place where it is very much on display.
Well, we're constantly comparing ourselves, right? I mean, because that's the way we're wired to notice people around us, and we're constantly kind of sizing up our own selves and how do I match and do I fit in with the norm. So there's an interesting thought just came to mind, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this. So what do you say someone's out there and maybe they're into fitness, they're into eating right, and how do you know when you've crossed the line, right? Because there's nothing wrong with exercising. There's nothing wrong. We should be eating right. We should be exercising. That's the way our bodies are designed. We need to get the heart pumping, et cetera. How do you speak into that to at what point, and we talked about this, the biblical view, what it is, what it isn't, and maybe we can get into that. When have we crossed the line in that?
That's a really good question. The first things that come to mind are this question of what your kind of goals you're making and what the end point is for you. And I think this would just be some of the best advice you've given me, Rodney, is just to stay curious. And one of those things I think in that space is, what is my goal with my fitness, with my health journey, and health being the normative term, I think, because there are aesthetic goals when it comes to fitness and nutrition. And those might be okay. There's athletic goals, and those are totally fine. And setting kind of clarity of what you're aiming for, I think will at least help. And it's important to have, conversations with experts and people in your life that can say, maybe that's an unrealistic goal, or maybe that's a challenging goal, but I really want to support you in that. And how can I help? Those kinds of conversations where it's open. But I think the problem probably comes into is if the goals we're making in our heart are ones that aren't, either biblical or human. I think one of the things that happens a lot in the fitness industry is it kind of ignores the reality of the human body. Sometimes our gyms exist or our fitness places exist to pretend like the human body is never supposed to break down. And while the biblical story is that it was never meant to break down, the result of sin and death is that it does.
Right.
And so that requires a kind of readjustment, and it requires Jesus to come and redeem that in our hearts and in our lives, and the body's purpose to be redeemed. And someday it is going to be restored and made new, but that's not the work of fitness and nutrition. That's the work of the Lord. And so I think being really specific and being able to answer what those kinds of goals are would be something I would just have for that person. I would encourage everyone to consider, what are the health goals, and are they healthy is probably the core question.
I love that. Well said.
Yeah, I completely agree with you of like, what's the why? What's the true reason you're doing that? It could be kind of hard to figure that out though, too. I think a practical, just kind of guardrail is, when you stop listening to your body. Like if you are just starting to have some negative effects for like, if you can't get out of bed in the morning because you're just dead tired, or like you're so sore and you're just trying to go through anyway, or like you maybe have been eating so few calories and you're trying to run and you can't, and you just do it anyway. That's not listening to the needs of your body. And I think that we have kind of lost the ability to listen to our body, even like stress cues, am I stressed when I go for a walk or just do different stuff? But when we push past those things, if it starts negatively affecting our sleep or our relationships, are we prioritizing this above our kids or responsibilities that we have? Just anything like that. If we push past and it does become a compulsion. Rodney, I know you say all the time, like compulsions are our head trying to do the work of our heart, and that speaks a little bit to what you were talking about, Josh, of what's the why? What's the real reason you're doing this? Are you trying to fill something? I think that the exercise industry does kind of go from 0 to 100. I know that that's happened to me is, like last year I was just like, I need to start working out again and like eating better. I've not really been good about this. And it touched that nerve, that memory of body image stuff that was just kind of like lingering in the past. And it went from 0 to 100. And that's not a normal or healthy way to start doing anything. We grow into it. We don't go into it, I think is what you say a lot, Rodney.
Yeah.
And so I think that just recognizing those kind of compulsion signs, and then also like, what is the why behind this? Are you trying to fill something, or is it truly for health, mental health and spiritual health? And it's all related. Yeah.
It sounds, kind of the motive. What's my motive behind that? We're going to wrap up part 1 of this conversation there. We'll pick up with part 2 in our next episode. But man, such good stuff. I love hearing people courageously share the story, and I hope it's blessing you as much as it is me. And listen, if you're struggling, don't face this alone. And again, if you need professional help, it's okay to ask for extra help. But we have a great safe space in Celebrate Recovery here. Fellowship Rogers, Fellowship Fayetteville. If you go to fellowshipcr.org, you can learn more information, and join us on a Friday night, 6 p.m. for Connection Cafe meal. And then we join together for our corporate experience at 7 p.m. I hope and pray that you'll join us this week and start your journey. It's just a great experience. I've never met anybody that regretted coming to a Celebrate Recovery Friday night, and I know you'll be blessed by that. Hey, thanks so much for being with me. We'll see you next time, but until then, God bless you.